Well, this is a fun story about why we have a food pyramid and why it has looked like it has since the early 90s and then subsequently led to skyrocketing rates of diabetes. One of the lesser known influences behind those guidelines comes from a small Christian denomination, and its role is rarely discussed. In the beginning of the show, I asked people to guess who it was. It wasn't Jehovah's Witnesses. It wasn't Mormons. It is not the Catholics. I'm going to tell you in just a second. The U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, along with the Department of Agriculture this week, rolled out this brand new food pyramid. It's basically an inversion of our old one. It says that your diet should be made of mostly healthy fats, protein and dairy, vegetables and fruits, whole foods. If you go to realfood.com, it's a beautiful site, actually. And the government has all kinds of tips on how to eat real, unprocessed foods, low in sugar and other types of processed grains. The old food pyramid was A-okay with processed grains, spaghetti, breads, crackers even. Like literally the government was telling you to make most of your diet out of crackers. Look down there as saltines. There's no nutritional value in that. That's a way to get diabetes because it's a constant insulin spike and have very little dairy and meat. Why was it recommended? Who ever thought that it was preferable to eat breads and pasta as the main course of your meal and suffer this constant elevated glycemic spike? Well, this is an interesting story. Most of it told by this is the way I learned it through Jane Buxton's great book, The Great Plant-Based Con. And I'm going to summarize it for you. But I have many times recommended that you read this book, and here is another time. So this is not the only story of how profitable processed foods came to dominate the American diet, but it is a big one. In 1863, a woman named Ellen G. White said that God gave her a message in a vision, and that message was that humans should eat what she called the Garden of Eden diet. By that, she meant fruits, nuts, vegetables, and seeds, and no alcohol, no tobacco, no meat, and very little dairy. This was part of the religion she would go out on to found. It was the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Did any of you get that right? Anyone in the chat? Seventh-day I saw a few of you did. Now, she founded this church in Battle Creek, Michigan. One of the families that would help her establish the church, the dad was a man named John Preston Kellogg. Do you recognize that name? You probably do if you've ever been in an American supermarket. Kellogg had 11 children. One of them, John Harvey Kellogg, as a young man, was given a job to typeset the books of Ellen White. And so her Seventh-day Adventist books and her temperance movement were what he would typeset. And back then, this is the 1800s, you had to letter by letter. So he was clearly reading the books and heavily influenced by the temperance movement. The temperance reformers believed that citizens were plagued by disease because of overstimulation and immoral behavior. So they set out to curb these things by abstaining from alcohol and meat, processed. I lost my way. I was going to say, from abstaining from alcohol and meat and practicing sexual restraint and promoting a balance between exercise, rest, and cleanliness. They were also very big on preventing masturbation. John Harvey Kellogg also typeset books on that subject too that told mothers that it was their responsibility to stop their sons from masturbating or else they would suffer from headaches, weak backs, spinal illnesses, and blindness. That's where we get that joke that if you do that, you'll go blind. That came from the temperance movements. They literally said this in books. So books about this movement would influence Kellogg, and it would become his life's purpose, which motivated him to make these bland-tasting cereals and prescribe a vegetarian diet. By 1882, he invented the cornflake, and by the early 1890s, he would bring it to market with his brother Will. He actually invented more than just breakfast cereal. That was just their most profitable. He had a whole line of he had over 30 patents, including the first veggie burger. Now, the question is, Americans at the time were not eating this. Why would they choose to? Why would you want Why would you want to eat this instead of bacon and eggs that they were eating? Well, a lot of that is because of the Seventh-day Adventists. They had secured appointments within dietary organizations in the government for decades. One of them was Lena Cooper. She was a protege of Kellogg and his wife. The Kellogg's had a cooking school, and their students went on to develop nursing schools focused on nutrition. Cooper graduated from one of those and went on to establish the American Dietetic Association. She served as on the staff of the Surgeon General, and she created the Department of Dietetics at the National Institute of Health. There are many other Seventh-day Adventists who would then continue to influence the plant-based diet, like this guy, Harry Miller. He was also a Seventh-day Adventist and a missionary in China. That's how he came up with the idea of soy milk. Did you know that came from a Chinese missionary, or an American missionary in China? Now, this influence continues all the way through until in 1988, the American Dietary Association issued a formal acceptance of vegetarianism. Of the 9 reviewers on that board, 8 of them were vegetarians, 5 were Seventh-day Adventists. The other 3 were vegetarians, but not religiously associated. And one was not a vegetarian, but he was funded by Coca-Cola. And then we get this, 4 years later, the original USDA food pyramid in 1992. Now, I'm not saying that the Seventh-day Adventists were the only influence in the government development of that monstrosity. There were other stories to be told, but we know those stories. We're told them a lot. The sugar lobby, the soda lobby, the seed lobby, who benefited from that? We know those stories. This one, I feel like most of us really don't. Like, what about you boys? Did you guys know this about Kellogg's?
Yes, I mean, I took a nutrition class in college, specifically.
I watched a documentary.
A documentary. Okay. All right. So this is something that maybe some of you know, but some of you might not. Now, did you also know, though, that the Seventh-day Adventists still own quite a few food brands, including Sanitarium, which is the largest cereal producer in Australia. They make Weetabix. You might have heard of this. Australians like to talk about Weetabix. They also make Vegemite. As in, he just smiled and gave me a Vegemite sandwich. That's what this is. It's made by the Seventh-day Adventists who believe that you shouldn't eat meat because of the temperance movement. In the U.S., they own Worthington, which makes plant-based sandwich meats, and Cedar Lake, which makes beans, rice, and sugar and coffee. Now, most of these companies don't have to pay taxes because they're on their profits because they're owned by a church. The vegetarian diet is still very much outwardly promoted by the Seventh-day Adventists. Here's their website. Now, what people may not know, not only in their influence in the American diet, but also in sort of overreaching in all areas of American healthcare, because they run large hospital systems still, such as the Advent Health, which is really big here in Colorado. David, you've seen it, right? These Advent Health is one of the biggest health systems. Did you know that's owned by the Adventists?
I did not.
Yes, it is. They also run universities, medical schools, research centers. They publish peer-reviewed research on nutrition. They have still quite a lot of influence in public health. Now, I'm not saying maybe they don't believe this. They probably really do, right? But this is it's their underlying religious philosophy that's influencing their research and products, and then is put on the American consumer, whether we know it or not. So this is a story worth telling because the Adventist church population is quite small. It's about 1.2 to 1.3 million members. It's about the size of like Jehovah's Witnesses. It's a small portion of the American population. I estimate that at about 0.4% of Americans, but they have such disproportional influence in dietary decisions in the U.S. government and healthcare decisions. So, it's interesting to know that. This is a story worth knowing when you hear the government pushing vegetarian and grain-based diets. Where is that influence coming from? Now, RFK Jr. has chosen not to do that. And what he says is more evidence-based food pyramid. But how do we know that the current food pyramid now is not shaped by profit or ideological pressures? Well, we don't. Not with certainty. What we do know is that human beings do require complete proteins, bioavailable fats, and essential micronutrients for growth, repair, and metabolic function. And this pyramid does clearly promote those things instead of processed foods. So we can feel better about that. But will there be people who profit from this shift? Well, almost certainly. That's why this scrutiny shouldn't just stop because of these new guidelines. We should always be paying attention to who benefits and what power they yield. So let me know what you think of this in the comments. And if this is